Good morning, Waukee Christian Church. Pastor Gray here again, and today we're going over chapter 7 of Amanda Henderson's book, Holy Chaos. And this chapter, what Amanda is trying to do is discuss the concept of messing up. We're not perfect, and we all make mistakes. I'm sure you're aware, but how do we act gracefully when we've messed up? It's not easy, Amanda argues, in our culture to do that kind of thing. She begins this chapter talking about times when she's messed up. And by page 103, she says, we live in a culture that values output over process, profit over people, and what we have more than who we are. Sometimes we don't like to admit that we messed up. Sometimes pride gets in the way. Who we are is more important sometimes than the things that we do to others. She continues in the next paragraph, for we are still learning to undo centuries of habit and painful assumptions that have been internalized and woven into our thought patterns and shared actions. We talked before about how systems implicitly influence the way we think and feel. Consider the way that women are perceived in society. Consider that on a school playground, calling a boy girly is an insult. Consider that to be looked upon as poor, or to not be tall, or to not be strong, these are insults. How implicitly we interpret these things as personal weaknesses, when it's not always fair to do so. Consider also the ways that we think of people who might not speak English, how we might implicitly view them as lesser. It is a hard thing to consider. It's a hard thing to unravel and unwind. On page 105, we read, we see mistakes as hyper-personal and fail to acknowledge our participation in and perpetuation of systemic and historical brokenness that continues to cause harm. Sometimes, and I've heard this a lot, especially in our circles here at Waukee, we interpret the idea that there is racism in the world as a personal attack. We argue we're not racist. we don't do racist things. We see our friends of color and appreciate our friends of color. And I would argue that it is never explicit, the lines of racism that pervade our society. It's implicit in our structures and in our cultural memory. And to be called out, to mess up in the way that we talk about and think about these things can feel like a personal attack, like a dagger in the heart. And that's what Amanda is trying to get at. Consider how someone might attack the idea. Consider this. A man wearing a dress. Maybe your first impulse is to be repulsed. Maybe your first impulse is to laugh. Maybe your first impulse is to shake your head at this liberal nonsense, right? This action, which is harmless on the grand scheme of things, has little to no meaning outside of our culture, fills us with a lot of emotions. A lot of emotions, and probably no one has ever said to us it is wrong and evil and anti-Christian and anti-American for a man to wear a dress. This requires deconstruction and analysis and investigation of our implicit biases so that we don't mess up. Have you ever put your foot in your mouth saying something that you didn't realize would offend somebody, only to find them offended and not glad at your words? I read recently about a person, her strategy, when someone makes a joke about her gender or makes a joke about her as a woman, she doesn't laugh, but instead asks people, could you explain that joke to me? And if it is sexist or racist or vulgar in nature, then they are then forced to have the awkward, stumbling discussion about why your gender is funny, why your sexuality is funny, why your very humanity and the way that God made you is funny to them. That's not an easy conversation to have, and that person who then has to explain it might feel personally attacked. But here's the thing you need to know. It's not personal. Growth is good. Learning is good. recognizing these implicit biases in your life, they're good things. And you need not take it personally. You need not be offended. Growth is a good thing. And it's a Christian thing as well. On the next page, page 106, Amanda says this, and I underlined it, I think this is great. The threefold impurities of egoism, attachments, and delusion are the leading cause of sin, which in turn lead to sinful behavior, suffering, and ignorance and delusion. So let's break those down. 3 categories. Egoism. Egoism is, broadly speaking, the movement through life of putting your own needs first. It is not essentially a bad thing all the time. A lot of philosophies are grounded in egoism. The fact that a person is an individual, a free agent, who ought to look toward their own perseverance and preservation and success first and foremost. It's no one's responsibility but my own to see to my success, and it is not my responsibility to see to their success or survival. It should go without saying, if you have read the Gospels, and although this is a valid philosophy, it is not a Christian one. We are not called to put ourselves first in every situation. We are called to put our neighbor first and love our neighbor as we love ourselves. So we need to understand that in a society that does value egoism and does see rugged personal responsibility as a virtue, Christians should take a step back and look at it largely and see, is that really what Jesus wants us to do? I would argue that it's not. The second, attachments. This is a tough one because as human beings, we are naturally prone to make attachments in life, things and people that we love. I don't think Amanda is saying here to not get attached to people. That would, of course, invalidate so many marriages, so many families. I would be lying if I said I am not attached to my wife and children. Honestly, I love them more than anything. But if I said that I wasn't attached to my car, my video games, my own vanity sometimes, I'd be lying because these are attachments. The things in this world, our material things, are temporary. And some of them will outlast us, and none of them, probably, will be buried with us. They, just like we, will decompose and turn back into the dirt. We need to focus on the things that won't turn back into the dirt. Each other, souls, our spirits, goodwill. God's will doesn't turn back into dirt. God's will is forever, and it's God's will that we spread the gospel of Christ, a gospel of goodwill, a gospel of hope, a gospel of service and love. Attachments in the material, mundane things, that doesn't fulfill God's will. That's not to say that you shouldn't have things. Of course you should have things and appreciate things. You should be happy in life, but to be attached to a thing to a degree that you fail to accomplish God's will, that could be a stumbling block. Finally, delusion. Delusion, the intentional looking away from fact and looking toward fiction, is a problem. When we are approached and confronted with our own implicit biases and the ways that we've always thought, the way things always have been in our life, it can feel like a dagger to our heart, questioning our very reality. Sometimes, instead of accepting reality or engaging in that investigation, we decide we're just not going to look at it. We're going to pretend that these questions don't exist. We're going to be comfortable and safe and happy in our own little worlds, our own little echo chambers where no one can hurt us. It's easy to say that avoiding delusion is a thing one should do, but it is so incredibly hard, and it takes sometimes years, decades of hard work to overcome these delusions. And don't think that you are the only one who suffers from delusions. Everyone does. Everyone has a point of view. Everyone has a worldview that they use to interpret the events that go on around them in their lives. The question is, will you put your worldview aside to be empathetic to the thoughts and feelings of the people who are around you? It's not about us. It's not personal. Learning is a good thing, and sometimes learning means being quiet and passing the mic so people can tell you what their reality is, because that matters. Amanda Henderson goes on to page 109 under the paragraph, brokenness in politics. She says, in political life, healing, restoration, compassion, and love are too often shunned or seen as signs of weaknesses. And holy smokes, is that true? We live in an ultra-competitive environment. Our society looks at winners and losers, rich and poor, good and bad. We always seek to be on the winning end of things. And competition in and of itself is not a bad thing, but when we start to measure everything in life by competition, the health and welfare of our brothers and sisters as competition, that becomes a problem. In the political sphere, we see Republicans versus Democrats, progressives versus conservatives. We see warring parties all the time, not seeking all the time to make the world better, but seeking to beat the other. And is that what Jesus wants for us? Amanda Henderson says no. Amanda says that healing and life and restoration, these are the things that Jesus wants for us, but more often than not, we are occupied with a game, making a game of people's lives. And we are called to a higher standard than that in Christianity. On page 110 and 111, Amanda Henderson goes on to talk about what it means to apologize. When we apologize, we are putting our ego behind us. And we are stepping out of our delusions and stepping out of egoism and our attachments and making ourselves vulnerable to build a bridge, which is ultimately what it's about, relationship. She gives us 6 good strategies for these kinds of conversations and apologies. And number 6 is the best one. If you want to read the other 5, buy the book. Number 6 says, remember that in addressing a mistake, your goal is not to prove that you're right. It's not a debate. Not everything is a debate. Despite what you see in cable news networks where talking heads shout and scream and insult one another, that is not what human discourse is supposed to look like. That's not healthy. If you offend somebody, if you hurt somebody's feelings, it doesn't matter if you think you're right. You've caused hurt. If you're talking to somebody and you say something that affects them, even if you think it's irrational, their pain is rational. And it might be the chest-beating, egocentric way to say, your feelings are not my responsibility. Guess what? As Christians, they are. If you have hurt someone, that's your responsibility, even if it's not your fault. Even if you didn't mean it, you still have hurt somebody. And it is your job to apologize and to make it right, even if you think that you are right. That's how healing happens. That's how conversation happens. That's how relationships flourish. If you want to make someone think that your positions and your opinions and the things that you believe are worth anything, show them first that you are kind. Show them that you are compassionate. That goes further than any debate, than any fight, than any flinging of insults ever will. And that's what Amanda is telling us in this book, is that it is not about us. It's not about our position. It's not about being right. It's not about being better or competition. It's about relationship and unity in the body of Christ. She goes on, and you can't really see it very well, but she's got this great graphic that shows all of the things that trip us up. And going over all these is beyond the scope of this video, but one that I really liked, and one that I think really resonates, especially with people in Iowa, is the fear of open conflict that she talks about. And I'd just like to read this box to you. Emphasis on being polite and equating the raising of troublesome issues with being impolite, rude, or out of line. When someone raises an issue that causes discomfort, the response is to blame that person for raising the issue rather than look at what actually is causing the problem. When I first moved to Iowa, I was told that people in Iowa are so nice. Iowa nice is what they called it. And I was excited because I really like nice people. What I didn't realize is that the upper Midwestern culture really seeks to not engage in any confrontation. It's very polite and very kind, but it isn't always conducive to growth. And sometimes you need to have a butting of heads for there to be growth, to approach something that's uncomfortable to grow. In fact, I would argue that the best growth is done in the midst of discomfort. It's not natural for us in Iowa to be open to conflict. Amanda talks about what the antidote to this is. Distinguish between being polite and raising hard issues. Don't require those who raise hard questions to raise them in acceptable ways. Once a conflict is resolved, take the opportunity to revisit it and see how it might have been handled differently. Dive in. Dive in the moment, have that experience, then reflect. Then think about it some more. Don't be afraid of entering into hard discussions. If we abide by all the other rules that she lays out in this chapter, then it should be no problem. If we come at it with kindness and with open-mindedness and an open heart, with our own egos aside, then confronting problems is more collaborative than it is aggressive. It's more growth than it is destruction, like we see so much in our culture and in our national and even private discourses. When I talk to my kids about what an apology means, I have 3 rules. The first is to apologize and say you're sorry. The second is to take responsibility and say that's my fault. The third is to make it better. I'm sorry is the easiest part. Taking responsibility. I'm sorry that I hurt you is harder. An apology that says, I'm sorry that you feel that way, or I'm sorry your feelings got hurt, or I'm sorry that hurt your feelings, those are not apologies. That doesn't work. You shouldn't be sorry because someone else is inadequate. You should be sorry because your action caused pain in the world and pain in their lives. That's what an apology looks like. And it doesn't matter if you think you're right. It doesn't matter if you think that person's irrational. Your job is to say, I'm really sorry that I said that to you. I didn't realize what I was saying in that moment and how it would make you feel. It was never my intention to hurt your feelings. It was never my intention to make you uncomfortable. It was never my intention to harass you. That is not what I meant by that. And if that is your intention, then you need to acknowledge that too. I'm sorry. In the moment, I wanted to hurt you, but I was wrong about that. That's taking responsibility. Saying, I'm sorry your feelings got hurt. That's not taking responsibility. That's shifting responsibility onto someone else and then making another thing for which you need to apologize for. The third, how can I make this better? What can I do to fix this? Sometimes when you hurt somebody enough, there's nothing you can do. And it will always be a schism in the relationship. The person you're apologizing to needs to accept your apology before that relationship can be fixed. And sometimes you will have very mature and very, very good people say, if you want to fix this, read this book about this issue. If you want to fix this, come with me to this meeting where you can learn. Sit down with me and let's talk about this. If you'd like to fix this, please stop saying this word, which is very rude to me. Sometimes it's not that. If someone says you can't fix it, then that's just what it is. You can't fix it. But it's incumbent on you then to learn more about what you did so that you don't repeat that mistake. And you don't need to feel badly about yourself. Guilt, to a certain measure, is appropriate. Guilt drives us to growth, but shame drives us to crumble. When we feel like we are bad people because of something we did, not only is that not Christian, God did not make bad people. God saw us when we were made and said that it is good. Shame has no place in our lexicon, but appropriate guilt that involves growth, that's good. I invite you to reflect on these things. Think about what ways that you have had to make apologies to people. Think about the people in your life that have had broken relationships with them and how a posture of humility might have aided that. We don't need to win, guys. And that's what Amanda Henderson is getting at, and that's the way Christ wants us to live. As always, thank you for watching. It's a pleasure to be reading this with you. I hope that whether it is here on this cold November day or in the future, that you're watching this, that it does something for you and causes you to enter into a place of meditation and thoughtfulness. But I am Pastor Gray. This was chapter 7 of Holy Chaos, and I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.